So in just the few minutes that we have, we'll see how much at 2-4 we can get through. And so we will come back. We'll probably do this tomorrow just for sake of time. We'll revisit those problems on the last section. But here we are worrying about finding all my zeros, and it wants exact situations, okay? Exact solutions. Last thing we talked about was our remainder. And remember that you can find remainder by doing synthetic division or by plugging and chugging. And if you plug and chug, whatever your answer is your remainder. One thing I don't know if I mentioned, but is like something important to us in pre-cal, important to us in algebra, is that if we plug in a number, so if I plug in f of a and I get 0, then that means that a is a factor of your equation. So if I plug in a number and I get out 0, then that means it's a factor. That means it's divisible completely. It evenly goes into it, okay? So what we're doing on these next three, basically the last three besides those upper and lower bounds of these problems, is we're trying to factor these things out, okay? We're trying to solve all the way. And I'm going to do kind of like a little, like, this is what we should do first up here, a little step list over here. The very first thing we should do, the first thing we should try is to factor. The very first thing you should try to do is factor. If you can't factor, I also might try a quadratic formula. If that doesn't work, we're going to have other steps, okay? If I can factor, though, I'm going to try that. And if you look at that first one, do you think we could easily factor that first number, 5a? Yeah, we could group that up and we could factor that out. So put those first two together, those second two together. And take your GCF out of both of them. So I get x squared and I get 2x minus 3. I can get minus 4x minus 3. 2x minus 3. Becomes a 2. I can only take a 2 out of 6. Sorry, I got a little excited. Can only take a 2 out of 4 and 6. But that's okay because what's inside the parentheses is the same, which is why we are allowed to group. And so then I have x squared minus 2, and I have 2x minus 3. If I'm finding all the zeros, that means we want to solve these. So we are going to set each of those equal to 0 to solve and figure out what x is. Okay, so I'll do the first one. That one's going to be equal to 0. Add your 2 to both sides, square root. And so 2 of my answers actually is positive square root of 2 and negative square root of 2. You guys okay with that? Same idea with the other one. We're going to set 2x minus 3 equal to 0. Add 3 to both sides. Divide by 2, x equals 3/2. So if I say find all the zeros, we have currently found all the zeros right here. And so I could up here write my zeros are plus or minus root 2, 3/2. Okay. That's not too bad. When I can just factor it out, I can solve, I can set it equal to 0. Not too bad, right? Okay, obviously the next one's probably not going to be that easy, right? I am going to look at it though, and my first step is always, can I factor it in my quadratic formula? I could try to start factoring this, but we'll notice, and don't necessarily write this down because it's wrong. If I start to factor out my GCF, I end up getting to a point where I do not have the same thing inside my parentheses. So I have x plus 1 and 4x plus 3. I can't factor that way. Is there any way I could quadratic formula this first equation? Could I do that instead? I don't think so. Why can't I quadratic formula this equation?
It's x to the third.
It's x to the third, good, and I have it kind of hidden. But it's an x to the third, so you can't quadratic formula that, okay? The second thing that I'm going to try, if I can't factor and I can't quadratic formula, is something called PRRs. PRRs. And that stands for possible rational root. Is that something you talked about in Algebra 2? Some of you are like, maybe. Some of you are like, I truly have no idea. So let me remind you. Let me act like you've never learned it, okay? I'm not going to put it in that box because that's going to be our reference box. Under here, I'll write PRRs. And that stands for possible rational root. And we find that by looking at my constant divided by my leading coefficient. I actually give myself a little bit more space to write that out. The numerator is factors of my constant. The denominator is factors of leading coefficient. So this is going to be a list of numbers that I come up with from the numbers in my equation, okay? So while you finish copying this down, once you're done with that and you're waiting for me, go to your equation and find what's your leading coefficient, what's your constant. See if you can identify those. I always call my constant my Q, my leading coefficient is my P. So if I come over to join you, my constant, what's my constant in this expression? -6. Constant is the number without the variable. So it's the very last number without the variable, it's -6. So what are factors of -6? What are numbers that multiply to be -6? Good, 3 and 2 and 1 and 6. They're factors of my constant. Now I have to do factors of my leading coefficient. What's my leading coefficient of all of this? 1. So what are the numbers that multiply to be 1? 1, perfect. Now, this is going to feel silly right here because we're only dividing everything by 1, but when I have like a 2 or a 3 up front, we're going to have to divide it by everything. So every number in the numerator needs to be divided by the numbers in the denominator. And in this case, they're just going to stay the same. They're just going to stay their whole numbers 1, 2, 3, and 6. Those are my possible rational roots. And once I get my possible rational roots, in order to decide what works, you either can plug in or you can do synthetic division to figure out which ones are actually factors, which ones will have a remainder of 0. Okay, so with our PRRs, I'll say step 3, but it kind of goes with our PRR. You need to plug in / synthetic division to find factors. Finding factors. So you either can plug in or you can use synthetic division. I generally like to plug in because I think it goes a little bit faster and I don't have to show as much work. I can do a little bit more of it in my head / on my calculator. When I do the synthetic division, I feel like I have to really show out all those steps. Let's see. Okay. And so when we do this, we're going to plug and chug each of those numbers. Okay. And to show kind of some work, but not like always rewrite it, I kind of set up like a base. And then I just try and like think it through in my head, okay? So we're going to start and we'll plug in like 1 to start. So every time we see an X, we're going to plug in a 1. Okay. 1 to the third is 1. 1 squared is 1. -8 times 1 is -8 minus 6. Will 1 plus 1 minus 8 minus 6 be 0? No. There's no way, right? -8, -6 are going to make a much bigger negative number than 1 plus 1, okay? So that means 1 doesn't work, okay? Let's try -1. So now I'm going to plug -1 in for all of those. What's -1 to the third? -1, right? What's -1 squared? +1. What's -8 times -1? +8. And what's then -6? So now I've got -1 plus 1 plus 8 minus 6. Is that going to equal 0? Okay. So we tried 1 and -1. 1 doesn't work. Now we're going to do 2, then -2. And if that doesn't work, then we'll try 3, then we'll try -3. At a certain point, you can kind of start guessing what numbers may or may not work. Do we want to just go to 2 next, or is there another number you're like, let's try another number strategically? Okay, let's think through it. Do we think a positive number is going to work here? If I cube a positive number and then I square a positive number, And then I multiply it times -8 and -6, will I end up getting 0, do we think? No, I think the positive is not gonna go very well. Because we're gonna start just getting really big numbers, right? Like 2 to the third is already 8. And then 2 squared is already 4. Like it's just, I think that's not gonna work. So I would try a negative number. Do we want to try -2 or -3 first? You won't care. Nikki, you guess 3? Let's try -3. All right, -3 to the third is going to be -27. -3 squared is 9. -8 times -3 is +24, and then -6. Okay. And this one you can throw in your calculator, -27 plus 9 plus 24 minus 6. Did that one work? Nice. Okay. Now, on a quiz or test, we don't have time. That would be like if we plugged everything in order, we plug +1, -1, +2, -2, +3, -3. I like to get it in with the first 3 or 4 tries. So if you get to a test and you don't find it in the first couple, I would maybe retry your work. Will not have you guess like 9 of them in order to get to where we need to be. But -3 does work. So -3 is one of my zeros. And in order to figure out what happens after that, we are going to do synthetic division to factor it all the way out. And then we will go back up to the top. Okay. We're leaving off on like such a cliffhanger. I know you're like, what's going to happen next? But you just have to wait till tomorrow. Okay. It's going to be okay. We'll figure it out tomorrow. And so you don't have any homework. How fun. Okay. Enjoy that night off. And then I will see you guys tomorrow. We'll finish these notes up.